Welcome back to the Everything Property Podcast. Today's guest, who I have with me, started the first ever non-for-profit charity and SDA company after the NDIS announced Specialist Disability Accommodation. He's a good friend. He's a former employer of mine. He's a mentor. He's an all-round great bloke. He does, however, support Queensland in the state of origin, so don't hold that against him. But Mr. Lindsay Kelly, welcome back to the Everything Property Podcast. How are you?
Thank you, David. It's great to be here as a trusted expert.
That's it, 100%. Look, Lindsay...
You'll note that I'm wearing blue.
Thank you very much.
I do have some sympathy.
Yep, for New South Wales?
Yeah. So I thought I would help with the ambience today.
I appreciate that, because every other opportunity you are presented with where you and I catch up, you're wearing maroon. So the fact that when the cameras come out, you opt for blue, it tells me your true colours. Look, Lindsay, the reason we've got you back on the podcast, you originally did an update on the new pricing around the NDIS and the SDA space, but the reason we've got you on the podcast, Foundation 1, we went from mindset. Foundation 2, we talked about building a team. Foundation 3, we're talking about investing strategies, and one of the more niche investing strategies or way for people to invest their money is through investing in SDA, which is Specialist Disability Accommodation. It is funded by the NDIS. You're the guy to talk to. You've got decades of experience in the housing space and sector, as well as in the SDA space, which is still relatively quite new. So, as a general introduction and welcome back, talk to me a little bit about, for those that are listening and thinking what really is SDA and NDIS and all that kind of stuff. Give me your best explainer.
Specialist Disability Accommodation is targeted for people who have very high physical impairment or have very high support needs. So typically, for example, somebody with an acquired brain injury, so they may have been involved in a motor accident or some sort of a sporting incident where they've suffered brain damage, could well be a NDIS participant that needs a special home. Their spinal cord injuries, so you and I doing something stupid, diving into a river or the pool, can have a spinal cord injury. That will change the type of home that we need to live in because we'll be in a wheelchair. There will be people with behaviours of concern. There will be sight-impaired people. Blind people need a different type of home to live in where they can see their way through. Kids, there's a lot of kids these days being identified as having autism. A lot of that is to help schools get extra resources.
Yep.
So they're clamping down on that a bit. But, somebody with severe autism will need a purpose-designed home to help them manage their daily lives.
Okay, so SDA, Specialist Disability Accommodation, there's a couple of levels as well?
Yeah.
You want to run us through each of the different levels of SDA?
Yeah, before I do that, so these people are currently living or will have been living long-term hospital patients. They may be living in aged care, nursing homes. They may well be cared for by ageing parents, or they may be living in properties that are no longer appropriate for their needs. So there's several levels of SDA. There's improved livability, where you may not have a spinal cord injury, like you won't be in a wheelchair, you'll be able-bodied. So a sight-impaired person, for example, could live there, or somebody that needs a lot of support could live in a home like that. There's fully accessible, which is designed for a person in a wheelchair. High physical support is a higher level, so in a home designed for them, there'll be a hoist in the bedroom and probably a hoist from the ceiling in the bathroom. So they need a lot of extra support that's over and above the fully accessible, even though the doorways and that will be pretty much the same width. And then there's a final category called robust, and this is for people with behaviours of concern who might typically want to bash things a fair bit, and so it's built out of far more robust materials.
Okay, for longevity. Okay, and how does the NDIS come into things in terms of how does the funding work and how did that sort of program come about?
Yes, okay, so let's assume we've created a home that may cover one or more of those categories I just explained. There's no income for the investor until there's somebody living in the home who has been approved by the NDIS to live in that type of accommodation. So the money is attached to the resident, it's not attached to the building. So the resident will come in, there's an SDA provider who manages the building and who claims the money from the NDIS. So the amount that is claimed from the NDIS varies depending on the location of the property, the type of property it is, how many bedrooms, what the individual's approved for. There's 94 different categories, and you spread that around a whole lot of different locations across Australia and end up with hundreds of different amounts of money that can be drawn down from the NDIS.
Okay, and what about SILs?
This is where it gets complicated. As an investor, you need some partners. The partner has to be who's managing the property and collecting the money in relation to the property, SDA, and reasonable rent contribution. That's an SDA provider who is registered with the NDIS.
So basically the property manager, essentially.
Correct.
Yep.
Then there's a supported independent living provider, and they are the ones who look after the people. They provide the supports, and nearly always is 24/7 that these supports are being provided. The amounts of money are very different, and that is also drawn down from the NDIS depending on how much they determined the individual needs in their plan to receive these supports. So there's cases, for example, when we've had a resident living in a home who may be entitled to a $35,000 or $30,000 per annum SDA payment. On top of that, they're paying $10,000 a year rent out of their own income. So as an SDA provider, you're collecting $40,000, but the supports that go towards that individual could be $250,000, $300,000, given the nature of what their particular disability is.
Okay, so it's two separate income streams.
Not
Two separate within their plan. It's two different allocations.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think one thing I want clarity is I always see sort of news headlines of people rewarding the NDIS and the system. Where does that come into play? Is that in the SDA accommodation portion, or is it in the SIL portion?
It's in both. So for this podcast, there's been a lot of property spookers in recent years who have said invest in this property in Queensland, for example, and you'll get a 14% return, blah, 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 and on they go. I can tell you now that in Queensland there are more beds for SDA than what there are people looking for them. So those investors who were attracted to these very high returns have got vacancies in their properties for which they are getting no money. And I had a broker call me just before Christmas who said, we've got some properties for sale, are you guys interested? And I said, are they in Queensland? They said, oh yeah. And I said, I'm not interested.
Okay.
And so I know that from the data that's available, and I convert that into something that's quite meaningful.
Yeah, okay. So two things on that. I think you may or may not be on social media as prevalent on Facebook, Instagram stuff as me. I think I'm probably on a lot more, but yeah, anyone that's watching this podcast will probably agree. If you're scrolling and you're in the property space, you'll get targeted with the SDA NDIS ads, and it's these returns of 20% and 50 grand, 100 grand a dwelling, and all this really good stuff that they paint a picture on. But what they don't tell you is where they're building those dwellings, there is no demand, and the only reason they're doing it is because they get a kickback from either they get their money on the land purchase with the builder, and then probably management fees, right?
Correct.
And by the time you're too far into that, a year or 2 years, and you've made that purchase, you've got an asset that's probably 600, 700, 800 grand. vacancies,
Yep.
purpose-built vacancies.
I had a phone call from somebody in January January of 2024 who said, look, I've got some property in Mackay. I really want to do some SDA on it. Well, they referred to it as NDIS property.
Yeah.
Really want to do some stuff. And I just had a look at my spreadsheet and I said, I'm not at all interested in recommending you do that. They said, why not? And I said, because there's just no demand. Or the supply exceeds the demand, or the supply coming exceeds the demand. So just don't bother. And they said, hang on, but it's a nice block of dirt. I said, it doesn't matter. You'll invest all this money and have nobody living there, and if they're not living there, then you're getting nothing. It's attached to the person.
Definitely agree, and I think I should plug you now is that anyone looking to get in touch or find out a little bit more about the supply and demand, Lindsay does put is it quarterly now? Or
It's quarterly.
A quarterly report together. You need to pay for it. It is worth the money if you're looking to go deep into this, but we'll put your contact details in the show notes.
It's a really interesting little...
Yeah, anyone on anyone on YouTube can see, but yeah, Lindsay puts together quarterly the supply and demand tracked numbers, and that way is informing a lot of people. Now, another thing that I want to touch on as well with SDA is that people, the biggest mistake I see, especially in the Facebook groups I'm in, is that people make this mistake they'll go to the funding table, they'll see what the most expensive bit of funding that they can get, and then they think that they'll go to the cheapest suburb and buy the cheapest house, do a couple of renos, put a ramp in, maybe a handrail, and they'll be able to get a couple of people in there and earn 200, 300, 400 grand. Do you want to tell them, or do I want to tell them how that actually works?
Yeah, look, a renovation doesn't really work unless you spend a lot of money. So the NDIS does recognise that you can do a renovation on a property unless you spend a real lot. They will still consider it an old build versus a new build, which is a brand new property. Let's just unpick that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's assumed in the pricing, the revenue that you get, the SDA and the reasonable rent contribution, that within 20 years, all the debt is repaid. And after 20 years, the amount of the SDA payment will drop by 40%, thereabouts, depending on the type of property, because it's assumed that there's no more debt, so you haven't got interest payments and mortgage repayments to make. Therefore, you're just getting a reasonable return on the asset that you built 20 years ago.
Yep.
So that lower payment is what applies to a renovated home where you may just have done some nice little renos and made it a bit decent. So does it make it at all that attractive? Not really. If you already own the property and it's being used for some other purpose, you can probably get a higher level of income if you did some minor renovations. But unless you completely change the nature of the bathrooms and the width of the doorways and how the kitchen looks, it's not going to change things all that much.
I think last time I checked, even for for the funding table, I mean, I can get it up here, but it was like they have a thing in the price guide. They have a section called the minimum refurbish requirements, and I think even for a one-bedroom apartment or one-bedroom group home, it was in the $300,000 mark. So once you say you're even buying that home cheap, and once you're putting that 300 grand on, the fee just falls over.
Yep.
The fee just falls over. So that's another common mistake I always see. I even saw it in a Facebook group a week or two ago where someone said, should I use, and maybe this is a question for you too, should I use an NDIS or SDA builder, or should I just manage the trades myself for a refurbishment?
My gosh. The NDIS published an SDA standards back in October 2019, and there's been some revisions made to that. So these are technical standards that you must comply with to be able to get the property enrolled with the NDIS as SDA. You miss one of those and it won't be enrolled. which means you could have spent $1 million creating a property on $1 million block of land, and if you miss out on one or two things, then you're going to get, there's no entitlement to SDA. So it's really important during the design phase and the construction phase that you have on board the right architects, the right SDA assessor and the other consultants, and a builder who knows what he's doing. There's a lot of naivety in that space. So there are architects who think they know what they're doing. They'll say to a builder, well, you do the construction certificate. So they end up with a design and construct contract. And of course, the builder just keeps on building, and you'll find that there's half-inch ridges between, the front entryway on the door.
The threshold to the bathroom.
And the door width is not 820, it's 815. The corridor is 950, it's not 1. And it does not comply. And by then, it's too late.
You really need the right team. I think we used to do a couple of these projects together. I think our access consultant that is very good, writes the book on things, had one example where the latch side door clearance. So when you approach a door, you need to have a specific, depending what way you approach it from, you have to have a specific distance at the hinge side and at the latch side. And down this corridor, they were all set out perfectly. What the builder decided to do before, when they were forming up the door frames and pouring in the concrete around the block work, was to line all the door frames up down the corridor. So what that means is that the builder essentially jeopardised all the latch clearances on one side of the building, which meant everything had to be, and they only got the access consultant in there at the end. And so they had to rip everything out. Had already been core filled with concrete. Had to rip everything out to go again.
Yeah. So a property needs to be actually the designs need to be pre-approved by an access consultant.
Yep.
And when finished, at the time of the occupation certificate, it needs to be certified as an access consultant, and then it goes off to the NDIS to become enrolled, is the language they use, as an SDA property. So you miss out on any of those compliance requirements and you're done.
Yeah. I've even seen one. A common one is, I'm pretty sure bench, it's been a while, I've moved into other spaces, but even your bench top depth needs to be 600, right? So what most builders will do is they'll get a 600 mil bench top, and then they'll put the splashback in, and they'll put in like a tiled splashback. Now that tile has a 5 or 10 mil thickness, which sits on top of the bench top, which means your bench top goes from 600 down to 595, which makes it non-compliant. So the really good guys in the space know that the bench top that they spec is going to be 620 or 650. So it allows for stuff like that. So it's just like those little things that we've picked up, I think, over the years, is that good examples, and pay peanuts, get monkeys. You really need the right guys on your team.
Yep.
Perfect. Who do you think investing in SDA is the best for? Who would you say, what type of people, or why should people be investing in SDA?
David, this is not necessarily mums and dads' investments. Gee, some of the projects that we've been involved in have been in new subdivisions around the western suburbs of Sydney. Did one up in the Blue Mountains on land that 5 years ago that was worth $800,000, now probably worth 1.2 million, and we put projects on those that would have cost $1.5 million to build. So there's $2.5 million based on dollars of 4 years ago. So I'm working on a project at the moment down southwestern Sydney, where the construction, so it's a single level, 3 bedrooms only, and the cost for all the preliminaries and construction will be at least 1.6 million. And this is on a brand new block of land that's valued at $800,000. So there's $2.5 million. So unless you've got that sort of money or that sort of borrowing capacity, it's not for you. It's not for people who want to go and buy a $800,000 apartment and get $800 a week rent. It's just, doesn't work like that.
Okay. So more tailored towards those investors that have a little bit more cash, maybe in the back end stage, people that have the North Star moral compass, and it's about the project and the people rather than getting out and this big cash grab that all the ads make out for it to be, right?
Yeah, look, high net worth families, this is really suitable for. It's, once you put one of these projects on the ground, it'll take half a year to fill it up. So it's not as if you put an ad in Domain or realestate.com and have a queue of people turning up on Saturday morning. It's not like that at all. It's very complex, and it takes a while. You can't have all these people move in on the same weekend because you have to have the right staff there to support them. So the transition has to be gradual, and I always tell the investors it's going to take half a year to fill this property up. Therefore, they need to be able to handle that cash drain on top of having invested a few $1 million to create the asset.
Okay, good bit of advice, I think. What do you think is some of the pros? Some of the pros for investing in SDA. What are some of the good things?
Gee whiz, it's life changing. This charity that I formed with a couple of others, we went from nothing, donating our own money to keep this thing going, to creating $75 million worth of specialist disability accommodation for 175 odd people. It's life changing. These people have been in hospitals. They've, very old caring parents with their 50-year-old son, that they've been looking after in a big wheelchair for all of his life. They're able to have a break, for the last decades. And their son comes into a building and he's got some mates around him. He can go to a communal area and watch the footy with others, and they can go on outings together and things like that. It's a big change for these people. It gets them out of an institutional feeling. It gets them out of a nursing home where there's people with dementia and other things going on around them, and it gets them into a home where they can hop on the bus or hop in a taxi and go to the local shops and have a more normal life. So from that perspective, it's incredibly rewarding. And therefore, people who want to invest in this, they need to see that. That they need to feel like they're in a position in their wealth creation that they can build an asset like this, and they will feel incredibly good about it. They don't get involved, but they'll drive past it and see things happening, and maybe once every 2 years they'll get invited to a cake day, morning tea or something like that, and get to meet the people who are living there. It's amazing. It's a beautiful time.
I noticed that you didn't mention, there was no mention of money.
No, there's not. I create any project that I create, I do 25 years financial modelling, and I want to make sure that the debt and the interest are eliminated by about year 16. So that then gives you about 4 years at the end of the higher income to tuck some money away in the back pocket before there's a drop in the SDA. But in the meantime, you need to use this money to pay off your debt. That's what it's for. The pricing table assumes that there's a 60% debt as a minimum. Therefore, you have to pay off the debt. Now, if you've got a bundle of cash hanging around, then that's not a burden, and so you're receiving a very high return on an asset. That might be at best 9%. In some cases, in some suburbs of Sydney, where the land costs a lot more, it's 5%. It's better in some cases than normal residential real estate. But gee whiz, you have to manage the debt, because year 20, the income drops by a lot.
What sort of percentage?
40%.
40% of the income
Thereabouts.
drops.
Yeah, it moves around a bit, but it's so in a fully accessible home, 3-bedroom home, for example, where the SDA payment may be in the order of $50,000 per person, that will drop to $30,000
Okay.
at year 20. Okay, now the $50,000 will have inflated over all of those years, and therefore the 40% drop is off a higher number.
Okay.
Okay, but you know, and pretty much the pricing is adjusted based on inflation. That's the recent experience.
Awesome. So some of the positives, some of the pros, what would you say would be the opposite? What would be some of the things you need to keep in mind if you're going to be going down this track?
Yeah, so the big risks are around compliance, getting your building certified.
Pay peanuts, get monkeys, especially with SDA.
Completely. Next risk is having the wrong team supporting you and managing the property and the residents. So the worst thing to have happen is nobody living in the home. So work needs to start at least 6 months before you expect the building to be completed to identify potential residents in that property. There's a team that needs to do that. So the SIL provider needs to be part of that. The SDA provider needs to be part of that. And then there's a network of support coordinators and others involved in the NDIS who are aware of potential residents and are able to help them get the approvals through the NDIS so that they can move into the property. It's really complex, so therefore an investor needs to make sure that they've surrounded themselves with really good people who can make sure that when the doors open, people are lined up to gradually transition in over a period of time. I'll talk about another thing. So you may, or an investor may have said, I want to create a high physical support property.
Yep.
So it may be 3 or 4 bedrooms, or you know, it may be 2 bedrooms or something like that. So they've invested extra money in this property, expecting to receive a much higher level of income.
So high physical support is the highest level of funding. So obviously everyone, when they do their feasibilities and they look at that cash table, that payment table, they go, let's do high physical support because that's the most funding we can get.
Yes.
So as an example, if it's four sort of 1 bedroom, what are we talking?
Oh, so look, you know, since the scheme started, most investors were concentrating on 1 bedroom apartments that they had modified with the developer to convert into high physical support. So they were spending, you know, $700,000, $800,000 on a 1-bedder, and were likely to get $100,000 worth of SDA plus $10,000 worth of the rent from the residents. So $110,000 is what they were expecting to get, and saying, "You beauty, I'm going to be rich."
Yeah, pay it off in 8 years, done.
And then until they got somebody who was approved to live in a 1-bedroom high physical support apartment in that area, you get nothing. So the vacancy rate for high physical support apartments around Australia exceeds 30% at the moment. It's huge. Like in New South Wales, you know, based on the latest numbers, it's there's broadly speaking, ignoring what's already finished and built. So there's 800 participants looking for high physical support
in all of New South Wales.
In New South Wales,
yep.
So 750, and there's 800 in the pipeline being built.
Uh oh.
So
not good.
So what's likely to happen is you get desperate and say, "Oh, I'll take a high physical support participant who's approved to live in a 2-bedroom accommodation," thinking you're going to get the same sort of money, but really you're only going to get 60,000.
Oh, fair.
And you'll go, "I'll take it," right? Because it's income.
Yep.
Or somebody may be approved for fully accessible living in a 1-bedroom apartment where you might get 80,000 and you'll say, I'll take them. And worst case is somebody's approved for improved livability and you're getting 50,000, So that has to be managed. And that is managed by the SIL and the SDA provider, working in collaboration with the investor to say, this is how it all works. Like in my modelling, I had never ever assumed that we would get high physical support SDA as an income source. Never.
Why?
Well, why? Why take the risk?
Mm-hmm.
Because I look at these things and I go, I know there's a bunch of investors out there providing high physical support apartments. They can have those people, right? That's who they're after. They'll work really hard to get those people. I'm going to make sure that what we create will tap into a much bigger pool of potential residents and still make it a financially viable investment.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may have a person who's approved for improved livability, you may have a couple of people on fully accessible, and if you get lucky, you'll have a high physical support person and you'll get some extra income if you happen to have created a room for a high physical support person.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never counted the money.
Okay.
And I've always assumed a higher level of vacancy rate than what is assumed in the SDA pricing table.
Smartest way to do it, I think.
Yep.
People massage the figures the absolute other way, and they think all 4 rooms or whatever are all going to be high physical support. Then they're utterly disappointed, I think, once they go through 8 or 10 months of vacancies and they realise that they can't fill it.
Yeah. So if I have a higher level of vacancies and I assume a lower level of funding coming in, and I can make that work for an investor, and they sign off on that, and then during the design and build process, we'll say, oh, let's just make that doorway a bit wider, and and we might get lucky with some extra income if somebody comes along, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up being a hero with your investor. They go, wow, how did that happen? And that's been the case in all of these projects.
Well, I think that's the best way to do it. Do you think that there's any more risks associated with it that people need to sort of know?
Yeah, look, so I'll talk about a New South Wales example at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
The former Department of Primary Industries and the Environment got a new name now from the 1st of January. They split that in two, given it a new name. They've been working on the affordable housing SEP, so the instrument that determines what aged care facilities should look like, what boarding houses should look like, what group homes should look like, etc. So they've been working on that, and they've released 3 updates to that SEP in the last 4 years. The final bit, what's been known as group homes, which has now got a bad name to it, so they're actually going to change the name of that to high support accommodation, which I think is a more appropriate name. They released a draft proposal at the back end of 2022. Feedback they got from the sector was not all that supportive to what they were proposing. Realised that they missed the mark. A lot more consultation took place, in the third quarter of 2023. They're away thinking about it at the moment. But what that means is that some private certifiers and some councils are going, hang on, this looks like a group home, but it may be something else. Is it high supported accommodation? We're going to touch pause until the New South Wales Department of Planning comes out with the updated version of the SEP. Now, that's most unfortunate because there's one council I know of that's sitting on a project and has declined to approve another project that I'm not associated with, but that's 3 years old. And
in council?
In council or on hold in council.
For 3 years?
Yep. Waiting for the SEP to be updated, be modernised pretty much. That's really what it is. So you have to navigate your way through that, and there's very limited number of people who can navigate their way through what currently exists. So these private certifiers, as recent as 3 months ago, who have said, no, we're not going to touch this stuff anymore if it looks like that. If it looks like this, then yes, we will. But if it looks like that, we can't. And so that's made it more difficult for some projects.
What else is, I think you touched on it then, and you took my thunder a bit, but is there anything else new sort of in the space that people should know about? So to keep an eye on the updated SEP would be one, but is there anything else, any recent developments or?
Yeah, improved living. Sorry, the category of improved livability, which is sight impaired, people who are not in a wheelchair, that's likely to be removed as a category and replaced by a term called shared living, which I think is pretty good. So those people are probably been living in a share house for most of their lives. Those share houses are being demolished now and replaced by, a duplex.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That is not suitable for them at all, because climbing up and down stairs is not necessarily useful for people who have got some sorts of disability.
Mm-hmm.
That bit of terminology is likely to change in the near future. The price guide that came out last year bumped up the revenue for some of those categories because those lower level designs were not attracting any investment at all. So that's got a bump, which means that we can create some projects that can tolerate those types of people to and that level of funding. Because broadly speaking, about 40% of the people who are looking for a new home are only at the improved livability category.
40%?
40%.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so high physical support is fully support. There's enough product coming through for all of them.
Yep.
So it's robust, improved livability and fully accessible is where the demand is. And there are areas around the country around the nation, where you wouldn't bother with any of those things.
Yeah, the price doesn't.
Well, you can't do it. Try and build something on the northern beaches of New South Wales, and unless you've had a block of land handed down from the family or a gift by the government or something like that, it's you can't make these things work.
Yeah, there is location. There is a location factor multiple within the price guidelines, but as Lindsay just touched on, once you get to the expensive suburbs or even like lower North Shore fringe, west, eastern suburbs, it doesn't stack up. You're unable to do it. Just the numbers don't work.
There's a fair bit of demand in the Ryde area.
Mm-hmm.
Gee whiz, to buy a right-sized block of land in Ryde or Putney, which adjoins it, Gladesville areas, it's $2.5 to $4 million just for a block of dirt.
Yep.
Then you spend $1.5 to $2 million putting a building on it. It doesn't work. It just can't work. So the location factors that would normally provide an uplift in the income still haven't been adjusted correctly for some of these areas where there's a desperate need. And so, there's a family I'm aware of who want to do something for their kids and some kids of a friend.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to buy the block of land.
Wow.
And we'll put a home on that because they want their kids to live nearby. And, that's where they've been all their lives and they want them to stay there. So that's good. They've got equity and they can buy the land and buy over the building.
Well, look, that'll be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you sort of want to add? I from this chat today, I've sort of got what it is, why it came into fruition, the different categories, how it works between SDA, SIL, and the funding, the building. We've touched on pros and cons. We've touched on who it's for and a little bit about returns and stuff like that. But is there anything else you want to put in there with your sort of expertise and your experience that you can share with everyone?
Yeah, so 3 things. You need to invest in an area that's got some demand, unmet demand.
SDA demand, not rental demand for normal people.
SDA,
two different things.
SDA demand, and we know where that is.
You do.
Yeah.
Yep.
Then you need the right team together to get the design and the approvals all done and the construction done.
Mm-hmm.
So that is normally a major piece of work for any family who wants to invest in a home. It's big and it's not cheap. It's more expensive. And then you need another team for the SDA provider, the SIL and the support coordinators, all working together to make sure these people to live in this property. So 3 big steps. And it's pretty important that you know who they are before you invest.
Okay. The value of the team.
It is.
The value of the team.
It is indeed.
Look, Lindsay, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it, and I hope for everyone listening at home that are thinking about investing in SDA/the NDIS as a investing strategy, get some good clarity from this, get some good knowledge and wisdom for this. Lindsay, I'll put your contact details in the show notes, so if anyone that has any questions or wants to reach out and pursue this further, we'll be able to reach out and have a chat with you. But apart from that, appreciate you coming on the Everything Property podcast. It's good to see you wearing blue, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks for having me.
Too easy.